Hey guys. All right, today we're going to finish up our unit on sensory and perception. I have linked lots of things today because a lot of stuff we're working on today works really well as like a visual. I'm not going to talk too much about attentional processes. Attentional processes are how we decide to focus on particular stimuli. And there's selective attention where we select on one thing, and divided attention where we focus on a lot of things. We've gone over things like that before. Know that while we are so selective attention, I had a few questions about pain management. Could you learn to block out pain? So selective attention is a way in which we can then change our perceptions of pain. If you learn how to do it, you can learn to select like which stimuli that you will then pay attention to. There's a whole form of martial arts that's kind of devoted to not feeling pain, and through meditative states, people will learn to block out pain. And a large portion of that involves getting kicked and hit in parts that hurt and blocking that out. And so yes, you can absolutely learn to do selective attention to pay attention to particular types of things. It is difficult, and part of that works because we talked a little bit about how a nerve signal can only send one thing at a time. So we have things coming into us, and you can't send multiple signals on one nerve at the same time. So if you have other things that are blocking that out, then we pay attention to those things. And so our brain's constantly trying to figure out what is going to be the thing we pay attention to at one particular time, and we tend to focus on that thing. We can block out other things at that time. Divided attention is the ability to respond to more than one stimulus. Humans, for the most part, are not good at this. We are not... Multitasking is almost always more inefficient than just doing one thing at a time, which I need to learn because I try to multitask all the time. Females tend to be better than males at multitasking. At least that's what the evidence that I've seen shows. But for the most part, we are not great at divided attention things. We're not great at doing multiple things at a time. And we've talked about this a lot when we talk about working memory. We only have a particular amount of working memory to play with. And if this is getting used here, then we can't use it over here. And if something needs our attention, it's hard to do multiple things. So if you're really good at one thing, and you don't have to think about it, then divided attention is fine because you're actually not devoting very much attention to this over here. It's like when you walk and you talk at the same time, you're used to walking, but if you were first learning how to walk, you wouldn't be able to walk and talk. Instruments are like that a lot. A song is really hard to do and like talk to somebody at the same time or sing, especially when you're learning the musical bits. But once you learn those individual things independently and you don't have to think about either one, then they go together. But the interesting thing today is perceptual abilities, because this is where wackiness begins. Okay, so you have a million different things coming at you at all times, and your brain has to put them together. Now, one thing that happens is if you go to a movie theater and you start watching a movie. So perceptualization, the processes that group smaller units into perceptual worlds into larger units. This is what this means. You get lots of this information into you at a time, and your brain puts it into something that makes sense and goes smoothly. So back to that movie theater. If you go to a movie theater and you watch a movie, it appears to go smoothly. But it's not. It's going by at 24 frames per second. In an old school movie projector, there was a shutter. And the shutter would open and close at 24 times per second. Open, close, open, close, open, close, open, close, open, close, open, close, open, close. And the film would go by 24 frames per second. And it would open up when the frame was right there in the middle of the light, shoot it out to the screen, move to the next one, shoot it out to the next screen, 24 frames for 24 times per second. Those things are about 3/4 of an inch wide. So every second of film that you watched when on old school projectors, ones that used film, 1.5 feet worth of film would go by. I worked at a movie theater for like 3 years, so I did that. Now, why don't you see individual frame, individual frame, individual frame, individual frame? because it's not a motion. It's not moving in motion. It's a bunch of still images, one right after another. When you watch TV, it's the same exact thing. When you play video games tend to go by at 60 frames per second. And that so they can look really, really smooth, but also so you don't get input lag. You can detect input lag for things that are lower than 24 frames per second. Like if you press a button and it takes 5 milliseconds or 5/100 of a second to happen, you'll notice. So the 60 frames makes it smoother, makes it so you have a better response time. If you're playing in VR, I think VR oftentimes runs at 120. Anywho, why don't you see all that? Why don't you see each individual thing? Well, it's called frame rate, and different beings have different frame rates. Like flies have a different frame rate. If a fly, and how we know this, I don't really know, but according to the things I've read and the scientists who know more than me, if a fly were to watch a movie, it would see each individual frame. And if it goes down, say, like 18 frames per second, you can catch those. And if you train yourself, you can catch individual frames for things like what are called cigarette burns. And they're things that tell the projectionist that it's time to flip things. So what's going on? This is called the Gestalt principles. Now, Gestalt is German for whole. So it's putting all these little parts together to create one cohesive idea that comes together. The whole experience is greater than the sum of the individual parts. We're putting all these things together so it makes sense. This whole bunch of information into one bit of information that we can then make sense of. Because when you start breaking it down into individual bits, all of this sensory imagery, especially stuff that's coming into you visually, which is what we're mostly going to talk about today, is going to be hard to make sense of. So, what's going on here? So we're going to go right here, the Gestalt principles of perceptual organization. So, certain things your brain is trying to make sense of all of this, as I've said. And the Gestalt principles work off of this. And this is likely its theory, so who the heck knows, but this is likely how your brain works when stuff is coming into it. First off, we tend to look at things and try to make patterns out of them. We're looking for things that appear to be similar. We look for things that look together. We're looking for geometric shapes that come and are similar looking. We're looking for things that are close to each other. We're looking for things in relation to each other, and we're trying to put all these things together so it's not a jumbled mess. And the first thing we're working with is the law of Prägnanz, I think is how you pronounce it. So here we go. Let's draw some pictures. So the law of Prägnanz says that we tend to look at things in their simplest form. So one way to think of this would be, say, like, I think on the Khan Academy thing they make this. Here's a really bad drawing of the Olympic rings. Now we see this and we see a shape of interlinking rings, or we see circles. What we don't see, and we don't necessarily look at, is this shape that's right here, or maybe these two things put together. We're looking for the simplest thing. You've heard of the idea of Occam's razor, that the simplest explanation is generally the right one. This is kind of the same idea. We're looking at things and we try to turn them to something simple. What is the simplest way we can look at this? And that makes sense to us. And we go, okay, circles are a thing. That's a pretty simple thing. We can look at that. And we can go, okay, those things go together. So the very first thing that we always do is we try to make it simple. So when we're perceiving things, we're interpreting all this information, try to make it simple. The brain is trying to turn something into the simplest, most recognizable thing that it can. Now, the next part is called the law of closure. So let's see if I'm going to pull up a picture here because I have better pictures than I can draw. So the law of closure means like we can put gaps in things. So we have this picture here of a triangle, but it has gaps. We can tell that's a triangle because we can connect these dots. in between these areas. Then there's the laws of grouping. So we tend to group things together so we can make sense of them. Our brain is constantly trying to find connections between things. It's one of the reasons why we see connections when there aren't connections. If you look up at the sky and you look up at astronomy, then if you've got stars that look like they form a dipper or a lion or a dude holding a sword. And do they actually look that in reality? No. But we're grouping things together, doing that law of closure, and we're also looking for things like this, such as similarity. So, if I make squares and circles, and I ask you to group these, you are going to look at these things, and you're going to group them this way. And this is the law of grouping, because we group things on how they are similar to one another. I'm sorry about the light. I'm kind of doing this at a weird angle today. So if things are similar, we try to group them together, whether they be through shapes or colors or something else. So if I put other things on here and I made certain things certain colors and other things other colors, you group the things that are certain colors together. The other thing would be proximity. So if I put things closer to each other, you will automatically group the things that are closer to each other than the things that are farther away. Let's see if how the picture that we had works with this guy. So there's law of Prägnanz. Oh, good. I used the right one. So if you look at this one, this guy right here is the law of similarity. And you're going to say, you're automatically going to go to look at these guys right here, which are red, and you're like, oh, red, they go together. These ones are together. Even though there's no real reason why we should put those together, maybe it's that these things are in lines together, but no, we are automatically going to do this. And if we look over here, we're going to group these guys together and these guys together because these guys are closer than this and these guys are closer than this. This could just be randomness, but we hate randomness. Humans hate randomness. We want to get rid of it all of the time. Then there's a thing called perceptual constancy. Okay, so the videos I have with this might do a little bit better job of this than I can, but here we go. So there's shape consistency. I have brought some DVDs. Here's a Star Wars DVD. Yeah, gonna get the thing big now. Okay, so shape constancy is our ability to remember and make sure that we understand that the shape is the same even when it changes. So in the notes it says on your retina. So if you were to take a thing and look into my eye and see the reflection on there of this thing, as I change it this. So right now, it's a circle. And as I turn it, it's no longer that exact same shape. In fact, if I put it right there, it's not even a circle. It's a two-dimensional object, it's a line. And then I go like this, and it's back to being a circle. Now, your brain is able to know that this thing that I'm twisting is still a circle, even when it's not a circle. This is no longer a circle. That's a circle. This is an ellipse. But I can tell it's a circle, even though on my retina, right there, on the thing that's bringing it in, it's no longer a circle. And you go, of course. But when you think about it, that's kind of a crazy thing. You can tell that this is the same shape, even when it's not the same shape. The other one is distance constancy. I'm going to draw a picture because I don't know how to show this one to you any other way. So, in your brain, let's say you're looking at people, and here's like a mountain, and you've got some people right here, and they're close to you. And then you have some people up the mountain, and they're very small. So, there's two ways your brain could interpret this. If your brain interprets this as in, we are on a two-dimensional plane, this person is huge, and this person is itty-bitty. So our brain goes, oh, a few things are happening with this. Number one, I'm going to assume as a human being that things are constant, and that human beings are about the same size. And so if this human being here appears huge and this human being over here appears small, then I am going to assume that this person is farther away. Also, in our field of vision, it goes up. which when you go on a three-dimensional plane and you go into the background to make it look three-dimensional, you go up. I don't know a lot about art, but I know that. And so our brain puts these things together. And what's really cool is our brain does this math. And let's say that if you play a sport and you have a person who's your quarterback and you're throwing a football to a receiver. You have to gauge how far away that receiver is. And you do that by eye. And you look at this and you go, okay, this receiver is this big in comparison to where he should be. Your brain does fancy math in it really, really quick and goes, oh, that's how far away this thing is. I need to throw this thing that far. Which is really, really cool that we can do that. And that's because our brain is putting together all of these vectors and stuff and remembering that this thing right here is the same size as this guy right here in reality. And then we can throw it at him and hit a thing from very far away. And that is size constancy. The perceived size of an object remains constant despite changes in the size of the retinal image of that object. So even as it changes on our eyeball, even when the stimuli coming into it changes, we keep the constancy of the actual size of a thing in order to be able to tell depth perception. Which brings us to depth perception. So we figure out depth perception in a number of ways. Number one is called binocular disparity. So you have an eyeball on this side of your head and you have an eyeball on this side of your head. And they look at things at different angles. And they triangulate. If you want to do some fancy math, your brain's doing sine, cosine, and tangent. So here's one eyeball, here's another eyeball. And according to this eye, this thing's over here. And according to this side, like close one eye, and then close the other eye, close the other eye, and like look, focus on a thing and see how they move to different places. So if you look in front of you and there's a spot right there, and it's in this place and it's in this place, so it sees a thing here and it sees a thing here, it knows as far as apart, it perceives it there. Triangulates the position based on the displacement of the two things, binocular disparity. And that will tell us the angles of these things based on what this is. And if you were to do really, really fancy math, then you can figure out how far away a thing is. That whole sine, cosine, and tangent thing that you may have learned in geometry. So we do that. So that's binocular. But one of the problems is our eyeballs are like 3 inches apart. That's how far away my eyeballs are. That's like, 2.5, 3 inches, I guess. People don't have giant heads. And so binocular disparity works better on a bigger head. A T-Rex had a giant head and had better binocular vision than us. They would have had amazing binocular vision. But we can't get all that. So we get what are called monocular cues. And the first thing is motion parallax. I'm going to walk by this camera at the same speed from like 4 feet away and then from many feet away. Okay, now I'm going to go many feet away and I'm going to walk this same way. I ran into my couch. Okay, I walked at the same speed on those two things. But from your perception, it looks like I was going way slower over there. Even though they're the same. It's the same as versus I move my hand the same distance and the same speed each time, but this way will look a lot faster. If I live up on a hill, I can look down on the highway and I can see things going, like on the freeway, things going by 75, 80 miles an hour, and they look like they're going really slow. But if a car is like right next to you and goes that same speed, it seems going really fast. That's called motion parallax. This idea that things that are farther away seem to be going slower. And why is this? Because in order to go over the same field of vision, here's your head, you're looking through here, here's your field of vision. For a thing to go from here to here and here to here, this is a much longer distance than this distance right here. But in your brain, it's going past the same like size of vision, so it appears to be smaller. You get this triangle thing. Lots of triangles involved in vision. And so our brain then knows these things. So it can look at things and go, okay, these things are going slower here These things appear to be going faster here and faster here, and that can help us to tell depth perception. Because if we know two things are moving at about the same speed, and this one appears to be moving slower, then this one over here can, we know that it's closer. Then there's texture gradient. If you play video games, you know what this is about. So when you get up close to things, you can tell textures, you can see details, and as you get farther away from things, they become blurrier. And this helps us to figure out distance. So if we look at a thing and it's very detailed, we know it's closer, and if it's farther away, it's like that. When you're playing a video game, this is the same deal. So you're playing a game, and when you're up close to a thing, you've got textures. Here's a tree, you can see all this stuff on the tree. But when it's far away, it looks like that. And this is for a couple reasons in video games. Number one, it mimics the way that we actually perceive things. Two, which is called texture gradient. Two, it saves on processing power. And then there's linear perspective, which if you've taken a art class, you know all about that. The idea that if we're going to draw a three-dimensional thing, we can draw lines that bring us into the inside. And I suck at art, but we look at that and then it kind of looks like it's going in. So our eyes are each kind of, they close an eye and you lose a lot of depth perception. But you don't necessarily lose motion, parallax, texture gradient, and linear perspective, which is why you can still tell a lot of, like, depth perception becomes way less of an issue with one eye closed, farther away, than it does up close. Like, depth perception is hard with one eye closed, up close, because we base our close vision off of that binocular disparity, but our long away vision has to be based off of motion, parallax, texture gradients, linear perspectives, and that type of stuff in order to see these things. Also, the idea of size constancy to tell us the size of things. So I'm looking out, I live in an area where I can see mountains. I can tell distance long away if I close one eye, but if I get up close, it becomes hard. Like, I'm not entirely sure how far away that pen is. All right. Interposition. Interposition is the idea that we can still figure out what a thing is if something's blocking it. I'm not going to go into much of that. Relative height. I went over that with this picture. We know that this is relative height. So things that go farther away, if they're higher up on our eyeball and they're smaller, we know that they are farther away and not just smaller things. And light and shadow. I don't really understand how this works, but lighter. So if you've taken art class, you do shading, and I suck at it. But if you do shading, if you want the part that you want to appear near you, you make lighter, and the part that you want to be farther away from you, you make darker. We perceive things that are lighter to be closer, and things that are farther away to be darker. So if we look at these are on a two-dimensional plane, but we think they appear to be closer to us for a number of reasons. Number one, these ones that are lighter appear to be closer to us because they are a lighter color, and we perceive things as being lighter as being closer to us. Then, if you look at it, which one's the farthest up off of this checkerboard? And you're going to say this one. And that's because of this shadow. That's because if a thing is farther away, the shadow is going to be more displaced from a thing that is closer. Go take a thing, put it on a table, look at the shadow, and see how the shadow... let's see if I can... No, you can't see it. Nah, you can't see any shadows. But go find a shadow and put a thing and then pull it away and see how the shadow changes and displaces away from it. So this one looks farther away. So that's what I'm talking about when I am mentioning light and shadow. Then there's another thing that happens. And this one is called ocular motor cues. So inside your eyeball, we talked about this a little bit. Here's your eye. Here's your pupil. Here's your iris. And the iris is a muscle. And when you focus on things, it tenses up or loosens depending on how far away a thing is. And so if you're focusing on a thing, your body will do what's called accommodation. This is accommodation, bulging and elongating the lens. And so our brains are going, okay, I'm going to focus on this thing, I'm going to not focus on the thing. And we do this by flexing and unflexing this eyeball muscle, and our bodies can perceive that, and that helps us to tell distance from, say, up to about 25 feet away. And then there's convergence. So accommodation is what your body is doing. So accommodation is the act of this, and convergence is the cue it takes. Is now this sends a signal back to your body, and it goes, oh, I'm focusing this hard, it has to be this far away. A few other things. Pattern perception. The Hank Green thing does this. I'm not going to go into a whole lot, but we've all kind of done these things. There are particular patterns that we are, as humans, are really good at noticing, such as faces and words and shapes and melodies and songs. We find patterns. We're really good at finding particular patterns. We talked about this and how, like, this is oftentimes, remember what side of your brain is with patterns? It's the right side of your brain recognizes patterns. So if don't mess up the right side of your brain if you want to recognize patterns. And this allows us to do a couple things. Number one, it makes it so we see faces in toast. So we find patterns in things where there aren't actually patterns. And if you've ever looked like at a wood pattern and gone like, there's the face of a thing in there, then that is form perception in action. There's a couple theories on how this works. So feature analysis theory is the idea that we look at distinguishing features. So let's say you've got a face. There's distinguishing features on your face. You got noses, you got eyeses, and you got mouthses. And when you see these distinguishing features, so this is feature analysis. We look for these features, and if we can see a thing that looks like a nose, we can see a thing that looks like eyes, we can see a thing that looks like a mouth, we go, oh, that's a face. And we go, okay, face. Feature analysis. We're looking at the features first. We're looking at the features first. Then there is one called template theory. And so template theory kind of works off of, we have a basic idea of, say, what a face should look like. This is your basic face template. And so when you see a thing that has stuff that fits that template, so if you look at a piece of wood and it's got some textures in it, and in the textures you see some things that kind of look like that, then you go, oh, that fits the template of where of this part, and this fits the template of what this looks like, and this fits the template of that things, and it starts putting these things together. The idea of mental blueprints. We know what this thing should look like. We have the blueprint for us. When we see a thing that fits that, works. I don't know which one's right. Maybe they're both right. That's why there's multiple theories. I will put up a few of these things for perpetual illusions. Illusions, optical illusions are a really good way to show how, like, we misinterpret information. If you've ever done the magic eye thing, that's an optical illusion. That's our brain making patterns out of things that aren't really there. I think that's about all I want to talk about. Look at the links. The Hank Green thing's pretty cool. The Khan Academy thing's pretty cool. And play around with some illusions. It's weird how our brains interpret the world because there's so much stuff coming in at us and we have to make sense of it. And sometimes we make sense of it, and a lot of times we don't, and we screw it up. And I think that's why TV works. And that's why a lot of things work. That's why art works. Three-dimensional art, as much as it breaks my brain, the fundamental principles of three-dimensional 2D art, so when you draw a thing and it looks three-dimensional, are all based off of this kind of stuff, with our eyes perceiving things in order to try to make sense out of these things that may not be connected. All right, I think that'll do it for today. I will see you guys later. We will. I'll do a short test on this on Tuesday. On Friday, go do a piece of service. I think I'm going to go clean up some trails that are around my house. And there's been a lot of people on them. And I'll go see if I can clean them up a little bit. Hope you guys are doing all right. Hope you guys are feeling okay. If you have any questions, email me, that type of thing. See you later.